What's up guys, how's it going? In this video I'm going to be ranking 16 of the most popular diets in the world based on how optimal they are. When I say optimal I mean in terms of how much they promote health, but also how nutrient dense they are. The ranking system that I have here is optimal at the top of course, then decent, then overrated, then deficient, and lastly we have prison slop. So let us start off with a little control diet. The standard American diet. Now, no surprise, this is going straight into prison slop. You do have some whole foods and some meat in this diet, but it's really just foods taken in their natural form and turned into more hyper-palatable products, so not a good diet at all. This is really the problem of choosing gratification over satiety and nourishment. You end up with this, a standard American diet. And this is kind of the epitome of prison slop, because it's pretty much the kind of food you would feed to a population to keep them weak, to be honest. So there we go, that's our little control one. Let's move on to the first real diet. And kind of the prototypical healthy diet as well, it's whole foods. Now, whole foods isn't that bad, but it's not always a big step up from standard American diet as much as people think. Now, obviously, cutting out the junk food is going to be a huge improvement for your health, but if you are just going to be fear-mongering, then I reckon you should take it a step further and at least lower your carb intake and avoid anti-nutrients too. There is a lot of whole foods out there like cold-pressed canola oil, raw spinach, things like this, even pasteurized dairy and grains, which can definitely cause a lot of inflammation, be pretty unhealthy, and for that reason, I'm going to put this diet in overrated. Definitely a good step up from most people's diets, and definitely not deficient by any means in any micronutrient. But at the same time, it could just be a lot better. For me, this diet really just felt like orthexia because I was just checking ingredients constantly, and the return on investment for my health really wasn't that worth it. In fact, I was consuming way too many carbs and fruit, rice, potato, starches, all these things, and really just gave me a super poor leptin sensitivity. So, fair to say, it left a pretty bad taste in my mouth. I can't really recommend this diet too much. It's a good starting point, but we can do better. And straight away we got an improvement. Let's chuck keto into the decent category. It's still not quite optimal. It could be, definitely could be optimal, but it really depends on how you do the diet. Now, my only problem with keto is you can still end up consuming a lot of oxalates and anti-nutrients and oils as your fat source, and even sweeteners. Like, I know a lot of those keto bars at the supermarket, firstly, and the keto recipes you see online, they're not very optimal. Now, there are types of ketogenic diets out there which would definitely be in the top of the optimal category, and we'll get to that later. Don't get me wrong, it's still very good for weight loss and healing from diseases like diabetes, epilepsy, which is why it was invented actually, PCOS, and even neurodegeneration. Your brain does like running on ketones and being fat adapted, super efficient. Definitely a good diet, but it's just pretty easy to do suboptimally. Plus, I feel like most keto people I see online are kind of just spending their whole life trying to imitate carbs. It's like they're getting just enough of a taste of carbs from the 20 grams a day or the imitation recipes, whatever it is, that it keeps them addicted, but it's not enough to really satisfy those cravings. So it can be a little unsustainable, but anyway, still decent diet. Now we got vegan, and this is going to have to go on prison food. I'm actually going to put this below the standard American diet because you are missing out on, let's say, around 15 micronutrients. I know that's a pretty overused talking point, but it's true. Some things are just straight up missing, but then other things, they may be there, but they're just in the wrong form, or they have a very poor conversion rate. Things like vitamin A or beta-carotene, the kind of plant vitamin A, I think you only convert around 3 to 5%. And apparently some people have a genotype where they can't actually convert any at all. So that's not very useful. I don't mean to be harsh, but I do think vegan should be renamed the infertility diet, because that's really what it is. You can't be deficient in saturated animal fats and be healthy. Next up, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have carnivore diet, which is going straight into optimal. This is really just a species-specific diet for humans, assuming you follow it appropriately. Some people don't, and they end up with problems, like James Blunt. I have a video about him, you can watch that. But anyway, millions of people, myself included, have fixed their health on this way of eating. And the best thing is, it doesn't even feel like a diet. It just feels like your natural way of eating as a human, eating the foods that we've evolved over millions of years to consume. We're really just hyper-adapted to eating only meat, and anyone who's done this diet, they can vouch for that. It may surprise a lot of people to hear how sustainable carnivore is, because it does seem so restrictive. I mean, if you look at just a picture of it compared to all the other ones, so much less color and variety, but surprisingly it's actually very freeing. Just going to your fridge, grabbing just meat every single day, meat and eggs or butter, fat, whatever it is. It makes you realize how much time you're spending thinking about food and preparing food beforehand. So I do love the diet, even though the one I follow these days is slightly different, but we'll get to that. Next up we have standard vegetarian diet. Now, I don't really want to put this in prison food, but I feel like I kind of have to. Whether it goes in front of or behind the standard American diet depends on how you follow the vegetarian diet. But let's just say this is just vegetables and grains and stuff, so zero meat. probably going to put it behind standard American, because even though you're being exposed to less toxins and less harmful things, most likely, you're still void of the essential animal nutrients. So, I'd say a standard American diet's probably better, because you're at least eating meat, even if it is in a lower quality form, like, McDonald's burgers and sort of sausages and bacon and things like this. Not ideal, but still, you are getting meat, and that's crucial for development. Now, next up we have Paleo, which is really just a better version of whole foods. I'm going to chuck this up here in decent. I might go behind keto, because I feel like most people can benefit from lower carb approach or a keto approach than Paleo, where you can be eating, a lot of starches still, a lot of things that may be inflammatory or promoting weight gain. And if you're eating these foods irrespective of the light environment, this can be a little harmful. So we're going to go just behind keto in the decent category, but arguably it could be on the same level. My whole foods diet was definitely a lot closer to Paleo, but, I still didn't have a great experience on it. I still, like I said, had issues with leptin sensitivity. But to be fair, I was a very, very high carb approach and too low fat, so that's why I ran into some problems. I know some people have great experience on Paleo, and if that works for you, good on you. Good diet, objectively a good diet. Keep it up. All right, we have a Pescatarian diet, and I'm honestly kind of tempted to put this in decent, because it's just such an improvement from regular vegetarian. But it really is only decent if you're eating a lot of the allowed animal products, which most people aren't, because, they're still, that's why they call themselves Pescatarian rather than whole foods or Mediterranean. So for that reason, we'll chuck it in the overrated category below whole foods. Still a step up from vegetarian though, still a good step up. Definitely not actually deficient by any means, still a pretty decent diet. The problem is you're not getting the optimal amount of the essential nutrients, because you're probably eating any animal products as cheat foods with that kind of mindset. And that's not very sustainable, that's not very healthy, so bottom of overrated right now. Now, to be honest, if you had a good development and then at an older age switched to a pescatarian way of eating, it probably wouldn't be that bad. But the only time I would ever really recommend that, or bump that up to decent, is if you were eating a low anti-nutrient vegetarian whole foods diet. Alright, so already better than vegetarian. But then you add heaps of raw milk, heaps of butter, raw cheese, eggs, and fish. Make them a considerable part of the diet. Then you would be getting enough nutrients, so really wouldn't be that bad. And if you had a good light environment as well, that would help a lot. But people really aren't doing this, so we're going to go overrated. Alright, next we have the animal-based diet. And a couple years ago, when I was a big Paul Saladino fan, I would have made a new God tier rank just for this animal-based diet. And unfortunately, that's not the case anymore. We're going to go straight to overrated. Or do we go in front of whole foods or behind? That would definitely depend on your latitude. I might go in front of whole foods, because he does have a good focus on sort of the least harmful carb sources, but that's kind of arguable, because Paul Saladino personally eats like 300 grams of carbs worth of fruit alone every day, and he is in the tropics, but still, that's kind of obsessive. I don't know, for those who don't know, animal-based diet is supposed to be a diet where you eat most of your man-made calories from animal products, but really the mass of the diet is made out of carbs and sugar, so it's not actually that optimal. I do really want to put this in the decent diet category, but that would be determined by your latitude. If you're getting a lot of sunlight and eating seasonal fruit and not going crazy with the carbs, keeping them under 100 a day, definitely under 150, that would be okay. But a lot of people just aren't doing this. They're living in colder climates like me. I'm in New Zealand, and I was eating so much fruit, tropical fruit as well, fruit that's been imported, or just a ton of fruit that wasn't in season, and just not very optimal. Gonna have to go overrated. It's just a diet that looks really cool on Instagram and nice when you've got it all on the wooden chopping board, but in reality, fructose from fruit is actually very glycating, even though it is a natural sugar. Being natural doesn't automatically make something healthy. Next up, we have the vegan ketogenic diet, and this is going to go below the regular vegan diet in the prison slot tier list. And it's maybe the most dangerous diet out there in the world, to be honest, because you're already deficient in animal fat from being vegan, but then you take away the carbs, which are actually the only thing sustaining you and giving you energy from a day-to-day basis. And if you don't have these carbohydrates as your fuel source, you're going to have to switch to fat and become fat adapted. Normally that's great, but when you don't have animal fat to eat, that kind of only leaves you with, I guess, coconut oil as the only acceptable fat source, which is already kind of suboptimal compared to animal fat. And realistically, you're just going to be consuming a ton of seed oils and oily things, nuts, things with a lot of anti-nutrients. And yeah, I don't know, this is kind of really just a suicide diet in my opinion. I don't know how anyone could sustain this long term. Probably the worst diet for humans. All right, here we go, getting into my diet now, the raw carnivore diet. And I'm going to put this above conventional in the top of the optimal tier list. Now, this is just regular carnivore, except you're eating good quality raw meat. And maybe I'm just biased because it's my philosophy, but I do think it's more optimal because you're getting more nutrients, less carcinogens and advanced glycation end products, better digestion once you're adapted to it at least, and a lot more jaw activation, so better for development. A slight step up, at least from regular carnivore, which is already super optimal, and you're getting more hydration from the raw meat. So I also just find this diet a lot more sustainable than regular carnivore because when you're cooking and flavoring your meat, it's a lot more palatable, obviously. Probably a more enjoyable eating experience, let's be real, like air fried chicken, delicious. But when you eat raw carnivore, you're really, I notice myself eating a lot less food, but feeling a lot more satiated and nourished. And that's just super sustainable for me. I feel like the leptin response and the satiety signals you get on raw meat is just even better than cooked meat. And it may change person to person a little bit. Could be some nuance there. Sometimes I actually switch back to regular carnivore because I'm not eating enough on raw carnivore. That is one thing to look out for. But other than that, I would say probably the most healing diet in the world, most optimal. So we're going to go right at the top for now. Now this next diet, also going straight into optimal, we have the Primal diet. Now it could definitely give both cooked carnivore and raw carnivore a run for its money. And it is a little different to raw carnivore because of the addition of fruit, raw honey, and raw dairy, and sometimes even vegetable juices. And also the philosophy around detoxing and other things that the founder, Arjunus Wonderplanets, used to preach about or wrote about in his book. Now, the Primal diet, obviously optimal, and I guess I'll put it in front of cooked carnivore because I do think you're getting more nutrients. And you can argue that you're getting, let's say probably better for development than both of these, arguably, because you're still getting some carbohydrates from the fruit. You're also getting more insulin-like growth factor and sort of growth hormones and CLA, conjugated linoleic acid from the dairy. So super optimal diet for development. I would probably say the most optimal diet. But, you can drink milk on raw carnivore too, eat a bit of raw cheese. I mean, these diets, they're just ways of eating. They're not like full rule books. You could argue that Primal is a little bit of a rule book. People get pretty dogmatic, but still, you do what works best for you. That's the most important thing. And anyway, I just personally find eating becomes a little less sustainable when I'm including a lot of fruit and dairy and honey in particular, because they're just less satiating. They make you want to eat more food. They do spike your blood sugar, make you pack on a little more weight. And that's actually can be one of the benefits of Primal. It's for, gaining weight. For some people, they say that you want to gain a lot more body fat. That's better for your hormone production, better for when you're detoxing. And anyway, to be honest, I could make an entire video just about what's more optimal out of these three diets and when to do each one. But for now, I think I'm going to keep it like this. So raw carnivore first, then Primal, and then cooked carnivore. And, this is really highly subject to change based on your age, based on your latitude, seasons, all these things. Anyway, let's just keep it like this for now, though. Next, we have Ketovore diet. And this is just a less strict carnivore, if you want to call it that. And you're pretty much eating a meat-based keto diet without completely cutting out the veggies and nuts and dairy. So, yeah, pretty optimal, actually. Let's go behind regular carnivore. And the reason I put it behind is you could still be eating things which delay your healing progress, maybe act as immune triggers for you, like the dairy and certain anti-nutrients. We can see here we got some onions and carrots and herbs in the picture. And, these can act as little triggers for hypersensitive people. And that's why if you're doing it on a broad population basis, you would say carnivore works for more people. But keto's still a great diet, Ketovore is still a great diet. And yeah, I would probably recommend Ketovore to people more than I'd recommend carnivore, just because on the surface it seems less polarizing and restrictive and a little more sustainable. Whether that's actually the case when you do it or not, that depends. But anyway, let's go back of optimal for now. I think that's a good spot for it. Now we have Fruitarian diet. And wow, okay, I'm tempted to put this below keto vegan. Let's go above because you're eating a lot of carbs. You're at least going to have a lot of energy from a day-to-day basis. This is not a long-term sustainable diet. This is another suicide diet for sure. And that's why it's actually below vegan diet, because the amount of fructose you're getting, the amount of visceral fat that you're going to be storing, I don't know, man. It's just not good for your health. You see the people on it and they don't look healthy. Some of them look okay because they're living in tropical environments. They're getting tan. That's a good way to softmax is staying lean. They're looking okay. But yeah, this is that amount of fructose a day. What, like 300, 400, 500 grams of carbs just from fruit? No, that's just ridiculous. It's a sickening diet, really. We gotta put it low down. Next up, we have Mediterranean diet, and I'm gonna have to put this in overrated. Unfortunately, we'll go in between animal-based and whole foods here, or it could go below whole food. Really either one. They're all at a similar level here. It doesn't really matter. But I have to put this in overrated just because of how people in the mainstream nutrition space really just take this diet out of its environmental context and hype it up, and also downplay the meat consumption, which is complete BS. People in Sardinia and Greece and these blue zone places are eating a lot of red meat when they can. When they kill one of their sheep or goat, one of their own livestock, they do love red meat, and they are not avoiding fat like people in the West are. And the main thing for why I have to put this diet here is it's a good diet in the Mediterranean light environment, okay? This diet only exists when you're actually in the Mediterranean. Otherwise, you're just eating a whole foods diet with sometimes things that you shouldn't be eating, right? You shouldn't be consuming olive oil unless you're in Greece or the Mediterranean, where it's from, where it's locally grown. All right, yes, it could be perfectly healthy for them. Maybe the polyphenols are fine for them in their light environment, but that doesn't mean they're good for us when we're in the, say, 41st latitude, okay? The reason the blue zone diets work so well is because they're pretty much outside for multiple hours a day. They're eating completely organic food grown by themselves in their own gardens on the same ground that they ground on every day, with bare feet. They're living a low-stress life in a low oxidative stress environment, and they're eating a good, good whole foods, low inflammation diet. So that's why the blue zones are so healthy. It's not just diet here. You got to zoom out and not just focus on the diet. If you are just going to focus on the diet, then here, these are the 4 diets where you can just make that the key aspect of your life. But otherwise, you got to really optimize your light environment too, and then you can start going to these more decent or overrated diets and eating the carbs. If you're not getting sunlight and you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, then I just can't recommend that. I don't see how that could be beneficial. You need to at least offset the glycation damage with sunlight. And that brings me to my next point. This is the Latitude appropriate diet. And I'm going straight to optimal. And, we can really go straight to the top, arguably, depending how much you want to lean into the whole Jack Kruse philosophy. I don't know if I'm that set on it. Why don't we go below Carnivore and above Ketovore? But it depends. Like if you're in a high UV environment, then yeah, we'll go above Carnivore. The whole point of this Latitude appropriate diet, for those who don't know, is eating, ideally whole foods, ideally the optimal foods, but specific to your latitude. So if you're eating fish, you're eating fish in the same latitude to get the sort of amount of DHA that you need based on the light environment. It gets kind of complicated sometimes, but if you're going to eat fruit and vegetables, then they have to be grown outside, ideally by you, but at least in your local environment. And then by getting the sunlight, you're getting the nitric oxide boost, right? You're getting better insulin sensitivity. You're reducing the blood sugar spike from the sunlight. You're depleting the deuterium, which is in excess in these high-carb foods. And anyway, I don't want to go into too much detail, but pretty much the premise of this diet is that your health is determined by your light environment. So you want to eat only local foods, no more Norwegian, wild salmon and Ecuadorian bananas when you live in New Zealand, right? That's not appropriate. Now, obviously, this does stem from the Kruse philosophy that your light environment is more important than your diet, which is definitely arguable. There is a big debate there. And personally, I still think you should be avoiding anti-nutrients and staying low carb and prioritizing animal products. And assuming you do all those things, then adding in the whole Latitude appropriateness, you can bump that right up to the top. But like I said, a lot of nuance here, really depends. Also, I think that some of these light gurus out there really downplay the importance of nutrition, particularly during development. So that makes me want to put this lower down than it needs to be. Anyway, that concludes this little tier list. Hope you guys enjoyed. I realize I didn't put anything in deficient, which is kind of interesting. I mean, we probably could have. We could probably call vegetarian just a deficient diet, and standard American, depending on how you do it. Maybe you're a more conventionally health conscious during the week and then cheat meals during the weekend type family, and maybe it's not complete prison slop. Maybe you get away with it and still develop okay. I don't know. This is kind of a tougher tier list to make than people would think because of how much nuance there really is around this topic. I'm a big diet guru, obviously, but even I admit that food alone isn't the end-all be-all. Right? There's other factors here. And things like your light environment, like the seasonal appropriateness of the food, things like the organic status, is it sprayed with pesticides, is it completely non-GMO? I could really make a whole video on each of these diets and rank them based on how optimal you do it, because there's different ways to do the diet. Anyway, that sums up this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Did I miss out on any diet? Did I get some of these completely wrong? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Cheers. I'll see you in the next one.